So it's obviously either, I don't know if you can call it feast or famine. Anyway, we just deal with what we deal with. Okay, and what we're going to talk about is using sources in your writing. So this will be around the literature review, but it obviously affects all your writing because you're going to be referring to sources through all your dissertation or your thesis. And basically, this falls into two sort of bits. We'll focus on the literature review first, and then we're going to talk about referencing, citing, how to actually refer to your sources. You're going to do a lot of the talking, I hope, not me. And I have asked our cameraman not to focus on you, because I think it's a bit daunting when you're trying to say something and you get I know it's daunting. So you won't appear on the video. It's going to be edited so that it's just the presentation aspects. Okay. So does that make you feel any better? Good. Little bit. Okay. So these are the two parts into which this afternoon falls, with tea in the middle. So we're going to look at what a literature review is, and we're going to look at literature review as a product and as a process, sources in the literature review, and then purposes in the literature review. Those of you who were here last week will remember that I talked quite a bit about the approach we have to writing, thinking about the writer and our purposes and the audience or reader. Then we'll look at referencing, and we'll look at texts, research articles and dissertations, and have a look at referencing in those texts. And we're going to look at that important issue of asserting your presence in the text, which people sometimes struggle with. Sometimes you hear people talking about your voice in the text. So we'll look at that. Okay, here's the model that we looked at last time, just to remind you that whenever we're thinking about academic writing, we're not confining ourselves to simply thinking about writing an exposition of information, writing arguments. We're also thinking about positioning ourselves in the text as scholars, as researchers, and we're thinking about the audience and how in our writing we are relating to the audience. So all of this will come through what we're talking about this afternoon as well. Okay, so let's start off with this. It's from a funny blog called Heroes and Heartbreakers. And it's about a very old poet from the end of the 18th, beginning of the 19th century, Samuel Taylor Coleridge. And he apparently is said to have said that readers can be divided into four classes. Okay, you've got them there, sponges, who absorb all that they read and return it in nearly the same state, only a little dirty. Sandglasses, who retain nothing and are content to get to a book for the sake of getting through the time. Strain bags, you see we've gone back a few centuries with the vocabulary here. Strain bags, who retain merely the dregs of what they read. And mobile violets, whatever those are, they sound very precious. Look at them. Equally rare and valuable, who profit by what they read and enable others to profit from it. and what kind of reader do we want to become in the reading that we do for writing our literature reviews. Okay, so you need to sit next to somebody and talk to them. Right, if you need to come and join us here.
You number 4.
Yeah.
I was mixed up number 3 and number 1. I was open for it, but I retained it. Keep the difference. And some of it, I'm not I because there's a lot to be done. But
Where people feel that they're a mixture of some of these kinds of readers. You can see the one that Coleridge thought was the best one, was the Mobile Diamond. But sometimes we struggle with our reading. I don't know if anybody wants to share something that was said in their group. Because you had some lovely discussions here. And then selecting the ideas that will be the lines that we want to use. What else are the problems with the literature review? All of you, I'm sure, have done your research proposal and you do a literature review as part of that. Were there any things that seem to take additional care? Yes.
I think one challenge is the realization that your literature review is actually a construction of an argument. It's not just reading the literature, but trying to fit your reading. That is a challenge.
Yes, I like that. So your literature review as an argument. So what do you argue in your literature review? What way is a literature, because we think literature review, let's plod through all the texts that people have written before us. And you're exactly right, it's an argument. You're constructing an argument. You're trying to achieve something by means of your literature review. What kind of argument is that? What are you trying to argue for your reader? Maybe that's something we need to think about as we go along. It's the value of the research. Okay. It's the gap. Absolutely. So literature review. Some writers say it's not a laundry list. It's not so and so said, so and so said, so and so said. But you craft it together in order to achieve persuading your reader of the fact that your research is going to add value and that you are achieving something that hasn't quite been done elsewhere. Now those of you who are doing doctorates, the achievement is that much greater. Those of you doing masters, you still have to indicate that you are creating some additional value. Okay. All right. Any other issues for you with the literature review?
I think it's striking a balance between depth of the literature and the width of it.
Okay.
Is there a specific subject or you try to cover as much?
Depth versus breadth. Okay. Now that's scholarly judgment, isn't it? Because you do need to indicate both depth and breadth. But also the techniques in writing about the literature. It's a bit like camera work. Maybe we should ask our cameraman to tell us about this. That you sometimes pan across a number of sources and you pull out commonalities and trends and you write about that, and you sometimes zoom in to a particular study and talk about something that in a fair amount of detail around that study. So you get, and we'll see when we look at the examples that we've got, examples of writers doing exactly that. Okay. issues, because I'm hoping that we're going to pick up on all of these. Perhaps not so much on selecting ideas, because I've sort of prepared this, thinking about the fact that you've probably, the whole process of finding your topic, writing your research proposal, that you've worked quite a lot working with the literature and then trying to find what is relevant and not. So maybe we can come back to that though.
Right, just another thing that I think is a bit of a challenge is if you've got this welter of sources, possible sources, and how to evaluate the quality differentials and which to include and which to maybe foreground and which not to. So you've got the conference proceedings, to what status can they hold in your research? That whole issue is always a bit of a...
Yes, no, absolutely. Okay, so I think we're going to focus quite a bit on this when I look at citing and referencing. And we're going to look in depth at text. I always think that's the best way. The best way, actually, to learn to write anything is to do it. And you will be doing it. But the idea of the workshop is really just to have us start thinking about issues that we come across in our writing. Because we're not going to do a whole lot of writing and talk about it this afternoon, because it would take us much longer than an afternoon, the next best thing is we're going to read what other scholarly writers have written and see what the practices are, what the appropriate practices are. So we will look quite a bit at the way the texts are used and the voices, because you can see it as a whole lot of voices. They're the voices. Hello. Do you want to come further forward? Yes, please. That's fine. You're drawing on other voices and representing them in your text, and your own voice needs also to be heard. You're representing yourself as a scholar in your text, so your scholarly voice needs to be heard as well. And that's always something that one has to work on and craft your writing around, draft and redraft, in order to get those kinds of balances right. Okay, we will talk a bit about the purpose of the literature review. I don't know if we really need to. You've done it so nicely for us already. Yes, I'm not sure if we're going to go into great depth about these things. I think this is where you will have conversations with your supervisor. Because you're talking about the scholarly quality and the spread of work done in the field, and the person whose expertise is going to guide you is very much your supervisor there. Okay. All right. So that's to think about the sorts of things that we will be looking at. All right, what do we mean when we talk about a literature review? Sometimes we talk about it as a product. It's chapter 2. Chapter 2 is my literature review. Okay. Or sometimes chapter 2 and 3 is my literature review. Think of that. So it's part of your final draft. And then sometimes we talk about the literature review, meaning the process, what we do in order to conduct a review of the literature. So I've got a couple of interesting insights here. One from Cecile Badenhorst. She says the literature review is where you discuss how your research emerges from previous research. Okay, so that's another thing that our literature review does, as well as constructing, well, it's part of the argument that it's constructing, is showing how my research is emerging from previous research. So the tasks you're required to accomplish in order to produce this literature review include gathering information through reading. There's a our issues of quality, depth, and breadth, selecting ideas. All right. You need to understand it, select and represent it in your review. So a lot of what you do is representing the voices or the scholarship of other people in your review. Analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating all of this, and creating a new text from all these activities. So it's a complex, difficult task, including some of the things that we've talked about here. And look at those terms: analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating, creating, all very active on the part of the scholar. So we're moving right away from a sort of a laundry list, writing down authors and giving a sort of a brief little summary. There's a lot more to what we're doing in our literature review. Okay, I'm not going to say too much about literature review as a process. But I like what Mouton says here. He puts it very well. Your interest is not merely in literature, which sounds as if it's a collection of texts. I think that's sometimes where we get the idea from literature review. Right, here's a collection of texts. Now let's sort of summarize all of this to show that I've read what's in the field. But he says, think about it as a body of accumulated scholarship. How other scholars have theorized and conceptualized on issues, what they have found empirically, what instrumentation they have used, and to what effect. So the literature review isn't a collection of texts, it's a body of scholarship. And I think it's helpful to think of it in that way, because it gives us more of a way in to writing about it. If we don't think of it as a collection of texts, but think of it as a body of scholarship, that we are going to, if you go back to Badenhorst, you're going to understand, you're going to represent that in your review by analyzing, synthesizing, evaluating all of that other scholarship and then creating your own scholarly text. Okay. All right, now I really don't know that we need to deal too much with this, but I'll just put it in for the sake of completeness. When you're going through the process of reviewing this body of scholarship, you will obviously read broadly, and then you'll begin to narrow closer and closer to your particular area. Who else has been working in the area? Look for studies that focus on the same kinds of issues, possibly in different areas. Look for gaps in the scholarship. What are the debates? What are the viewpoints? Where do you stand in terms of those debates and viewpoints? So already as you're reading, you're bringing a critical eye to that body of scholarship, an analytical and critical eye. And you're looking for the theoretical and conceptual frameworks that people are using. You're also looking at methodology. And when you keep notes, you're not focusing simply on content, right? Simply on the findings. But you want to think about details of argument methodology and always the bibliographic information. I don't think I know many people who have finished a dissertation or thesis who haven't got a sort of a war story about some reference that they forgot to note down, and it became, yes, people are nodding because we've all been there. And you find this wonderful quote, but oh my word, you can't remember where you got it from. And you search and you cannot find it, and in the end you have to excise it from your thesis or dissertation. And don't sit right at the back, come and sit a little bit further forward. We've got space today, we don't want to put it all up. Are you okay? I don't know what it is, we like the back row. similar theoretical background, different theoretical background? What are the commonalities with other scholars that I've read? What are the differences? So you're already beginning to cross-reference things in your notes and build up your review of the body of scholarship. Okay, please feel free to stop me at any time. If you want to tell us a boring war story, you may. Or if you have a question or a comment to add to what we're talking about, please do. We're a lovely small group today, so we can do that. Okay, so here's more tonic thoughts about taking notes for the literature review. Write it descriptively, but always write analytically and critically as well. Make connections between one reference and another, explicit links between these sources and your own work. And now here's an idea, also from Barton Horse. Take the argument and think of it as a dialogue. So when you're reading, a way of reading critically, reading between the lines, is to talk back to what you're reading. Very often we read analytically, we read to understand what the writer is saying, and that's important. But as well as that, we also need to read back and say, what's the reason for this? You've given one reason. I'm not sure that I'm convinced by that. This doesn't seem sufficient evidence. The sort of evidence that I would be looking at, that kind of conversation back, that's what I mean by reading critically and interacting with the text. And those are the things that you need to note down as well. And sometimes, we glorify published text. And we think that because it's there in black and white and it's published, this is worth writing down. But my own ideas that are grappling and groping for something, we don't often think that that is worth writing down. But it is, because that's part of the process of dealing critically with the text. And unless we start groping and grappling with our ideas and in relation to other people's ideas, we're never going to be able to, in our polished, final dissertational thesis, have that critical edge. So it's got to start with your note taking. Okay. Right, we've said all of that, I think. Here's another definition of a literature review, Vital and Jansen, an informed assessment. Right? What we've been talking about is how to make it informed and how to make it an assessment. An informed assessment of the existing research on the topic under study. And here you've got both your breadth and your depth coming up. It demonstrates wide and deep reading. So both of those are important. All right. And as I said, I think this kind of thing is what you talk about with your supervisor. When supervisors say, haven't you read this? And I think you should read a little bit more on this. And can you do another search? That's exactly the direction that they're pointing me in. Again, I said it. This is just to summarize it here. Literature review is not a list of references. It's a critical and persuasive account of existing research. It has to persuade your audience its goal focus. And we started talking about that right at the beginning of the afternoon. Again, we've talked about this. Here's a way of just putting it together. The argument, your argument, with evidence from books and articles to support it, outlines your representation of what is in the literature. So it's not what's in the literature, it's your representation of what's in the literature. So it includes a lot of selection, organizing, comparing, contrasting, putting together, getting exposition on. So it's your representation of what's in the literature and indicates how your study addresses the gap, there it is, or weaknesses in existing knowledge. And there are always gaps and weaknesses. There are always other viewpoints that can be brought in. Sometimes we get nervous with presenting presenting our own ideas. But that is how scholarship works. It's like a conversation, and we all contribute to it. We listen to what others are saying, and then we say, but, yes, okay, I get that, but so-and-so has just said something else. That's exactly the kind of thing that we're doing in our literature review. Okay. I like that picture of a dinner table conversation, being a scholarly conversation. There isn't the good food, but there's the food of the mind, I'm sure. Where there are voices within your field taking in turns to talk to each other. Okay. And to build up the conversation moves as a result of the things people are saying to each other. New insights arise, new directions are taken. So it's exactly that sort of exciting process. Okay, so having said all of that, then what are your purposes in the literature review? To situate your study in the literature by identifying a knowledge gap, right? To provide supporting evidence for a practical problem or issue addressed by your research, and in this way to show its importance. You see, I told you, you've said it all at the beginning here. To explain or unpack your use of concepts, that will be part of your literature review. The concepts that you are going to write about and are going to be important in your study, they come from somewhere. They should be located in the literature. You may develop them, or you may pick and choose from among what's available, or you may integrate things in order to achieve a better way of looking at a particular concept, term, definition. But that all needs to be located in the literature. To introduce relevant terminology, provide definitions, we mentioned that. To develop an argument for what is in the literature and how it relates to your study, and to show the counter arguments. There are different arguments around already existing in the literature. You need to show these as well and how they relate to your topic and your approach and your study. Now your reader, that examiner, or that concept of a reader that we all have, we have to sort of establish for ourselves as we write. The reader wants to see how your research is located in the literature. You know that many examiners I've heard say that one of the first things they do when they look at somebody's dissertation or thesis is to actually look at the reference list, because they're interested in those issues of breadth and depth that you identified as being important and as being challenging. Examiners are interested in that. They want to see which other voices are you drawing into your argument? Which other voices in the conversation have you listened to and are representing in your text? So your examiner will want to see how your research is situated in the literature. First of all, by what's out there, and then how you actually achieve situating it and representing it in your literature review. Your examiner also wants to see that you have provided a critical reading of the field. All the things that we've been talking about as being important, your examiner will specifically look for those things, that you're aware of the intellectual debates, that you can not only describe but also analyze and evaluate the relevant literature. And the examiner in your literature review wants to be persuaded by you that you have a perspective and that you have a convincing argument with regard to it. So that chapter 1 that we talked about, was it a week ago? Oh, yes, wasn't long ago, was it? Chapter 1. Now, I hope you're all moving on, forging ahead with chapter 2. We said chapter 1 was so crucial. It set it's